Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of Rabbi Adam Kligfeld's weekly Rashi study class.
Hello to anyone who is listening on the Temple Beth Am podcast series. Sorry we couldn't meet last week because I was under the weather. You'll hear a little bit in my voice. I'm feeling much better, but I apologize in advance if my voice is scratchy and other things. We are still in the beginning of chapter 12 of the book of Shemot. I believe that we read the first Rashi last time, which was 2 weeks ago, on Pasuk Gimel in the third verse. So I'm going to read the verse again to give us some momentum. We'll say quickly what Rashi said in his first comment, but he has two or three other comments on the verse itself. Okay, as we discussed, the first two verses of chapter 12 are their own little mini thing, which we're not going to go back into, but introducing the notion of the lunar calendar, HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem. We commemorate that on Shabbat HaChodesh, the Shabbat, one of the Shabbatot before Pesach, one of the four special Shabbatot surrounding Purim. And then the rest of the chapter is basically a description of the preparations for the sacrifice on Exodus night, and then a description of how that's going to be happening in perpetuity, and we're right in that. So in verse 3, that's the verse we're dealing with. Dabru el kol adat Yisrael lemor, speak to the whole congregation of Israel, saying, Be'asor lachodesh, on the 10th of the month, hazeh. Which month? This month. We'll discuss what the hazeh might be doing there, aside from the obvious when we get to Rashi. V'ikchu lahem ish se levet avot. Each man will take for himself a lamb, and then we have this double phrase, levet avot set labayit. Something like a lamb for a household, a lamb for a house. And the way the Torah is written is not clear. Is it both? Is it either or? Are we misunderstanding the phrases? That's what we're going to get into. So far, the only thing that Rashi had spoken about on the verse, the first comment was, why is it Dabru el kol adat b'nei Yisrael? And then if Moshe is doing the primary speaking, why is God asking Moshe and Aaron to do this together? And he gives a nice little midrash about how Moshe and Aaron would constantly be cholek kavod on one another, giving each other honor, as if the Israelites' experience was that both of them were speaking, even though primarily Moses is the intermediary. Okay, I don't think that we got to the second comment of the Rashi, right? So we're on the second comment of the Rashi. Dabru el kol adat Yisrael lemor be'asor lachodesh. It's a long dibur hamatchil. We've discussed many times that the diburei hamatchil, the opening lines of Rashi on which Rashi's commenting, may or may not be original to him. Maybe ex post facto editors trying to imagine which words in the verse he's commenting on based on the content of his comment. Okay. Joel, do you want to read the Rashi on Dabru el kol adat Yisrael lemor be'asor lachodesh?
Dibru kol adat Yisrael lemor be'asor lachodesh, dibru hayom b'rosh hachodesh. Say today on the Rosh Chodesh, on first of the month. She yikchuhu ba'asor lachodesh, that they shall take on the 10th of the month.
Okay, that's the comment. Yeah. So this is a version of a Rashi comment where he's not using many words. None of the words are complicated, but it might be very complicated to figure out what he's saying, why he's saying it, what he's responding to in the verse. All Rashi, said 7 words here, basically paraphrasing the verse. Speak today on Rosh Chodesh that they shall take it on the 10th of the month. What's the problem in the verse Rashi thinks he's trying to solve? This is in the category of read it this way, lest you read it the other way. What's the other way? One might read the verse, even though you might say, I never would have read it that way. It says that he's telling us not to read it that way. Stevie?
Oh, sorry, no. Maybe it could be interpreted as say this on the 10th.
Exactly, right? You might say, I would never read it that way. Rashi would say, you might not, but someone else might. And so I want to make sure no one is reading the verse to mean the following thing. Speak to the congregation of Israel and say to them on the 10th of the month, rather than the 10th of the month being part of the content of the speech. Don't think that the 10th of the month is when the speaking is happening. The 10th of the month is when the thing that they're being asked to do is supposed to happen. That seems to make sense. Without his commentary, he felt the need to comment on it. That I don't think there's anything more going on there than that. This is don't read it that way. That would be wrong. And I think you can make a slight connection between this comment and the next comment, given his understanding of the significance of the 10th of the month. When we discussed this 2 weeks ago, we realized we raised the idea that in our Pesach, right, and this chapter is setting up both Exodus night and our commemoration of Exodus night in perpetuity. Our Pesach, your Pesach, for all of its insanity, has no association with the 10th of the month of Nisan. Aside from people being frenzied and the price of whole wheat matzah going up as we get closer to Seder, there's no aspect of a modern Pesach that has anything to do with 4 nights before the Seder, right? So Rashi is going to continue on that theme, on the hazeh, right, which is the phrase be'asor lachodesh hazeh, on the 10th of this month. And he's going to say, do you really need the hazeh? They're in the month. You don't need the this to suggest that. What's his answer, Joel?
So we're going from the longest Dibor Matchil to the shortest.
Correct. 3 letters. Hazeh.
Pesach Mitzrayim Mikacho Ba'asor. The Pesach of Egypt.
What does the Pesach of Egypt mean?
The sacrifice?
Historically, what does it mean? That one, right? Like the Paschal offering on Exodus night, which he's referring to in shorthand as Pesach Mitzrayim, Mikacho Be'asor. What's a mekach? Like lakachat. Take or
Derive?
Acquire, purchase. A mekach is a purchase. So he's saying that night, on what will be referred to as Pesach Mitzrayim, Mikacho Be'asor,
Velo Pesach Dorot, and not Pesach of future generations.
meaning
The current one, modern day.
right. So put that whole little phrase into your own words, Joel.
That then they did it on the 10th, but now we don't do that anymore.
Right. That there's an obligation being given by God in the 12th chapter of Shemot that for this night, in preparation for it, you have to make the purchase of the animal that you're going to sacrifice Erev Pesach on the 10th. But Pesach Dorot, for the Pesach that's going to be observed by the generations, and by the way, he's referring to
when they're still sacrificing.
right, the Pesach of the generations that ended when the temple ended, right? Because that you still had to acquire a Pesach offering, as we're gonna read a little bit, but there was no obligation when the temple stood to buy it on the 10th of Nisan. You could buy it whenever you wanted. You could buy it closer as long as you sacrifice it in the right time. Lo Pesach Dorot. Yeah, Barry.
They need the time to get the blood on the doorposts. We don't do that anymore.
Perhaps, right? The Torah doesn't tell us why it's the case. That's a possibility that there was more to be done. Whereas in future Pesachs, it was just the slaughter and the consumption, maybe. But for some reason, Rashi wants us to make sure that we understand that there's no ongoing halachic valence to the 10th of the month, and he's playing with why the hazeh is there. Because you could make the argument, I wouldn't, that the hazeh is extraneous. Yes, Norm.
I don't think that the need to smear on the lintels and doorpost is a good reason, because that's not done until that last day. However, there is something about sticking your neck out and taking a lamb for your household from the flock and selecting it that is likely to arouse suspicions of any garden variety Egyptians that are hanging out, or any other people, even Jews who aren't participating in this, Israelites. And so there's this sort of active thing that you're doing in anticipation, and that's a somewhat public thing, because, you know, normally you didn't take a lamb and bring it over to your household or your courtyard, separating it from the rest of the flock.
So you're saying that by forcing them to do it earlier, it's forcing them to be more bold in their actions? They can't just do it last minute Erev Pesach. They They have to buy it now. They have to make it clear to them and anyone who's watching, something's happening. They're on their way out.
That's right. They can't
Interesting.
say, "Oh, I didn't realize it was coming early this year."
Interesting midrash on the midrash. Possible. Yeah, don't know. Anyone else on that?
Yeah.
Yes, Tova?
Well, it's just an elaboration of the same thing. And I think I've alluded to something similar earlier, that it's also making the public choice that you are part of this people, that you are part of the group that's going to participate in this action, and doing it now rather than last minute, in a sense. I mean, but in a way that suggests that people who doubted, who were stragglers, were
Interesting.
out.
So you're reading it as saying God asking all of the Israelites to choose now, are you with us or are you against us? We
Yeah.
don't want any last minute
Yeah.
people riding the coattails as they saw it was going to be successful, even though we're told later on we have an era of Rav coming out.
Mhm.
You have to make a positive decision on the 10th of Nisan before things start going to motion. Are you joining us now?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Lovely, Josh. Steve.
I agree with all of that, but I'll just add a very practical thing that in temple times, people traveled to Jerusalem. So acquiring your animal the day of seems very useful. Whereas if you had to have your animal 4 days before, it means you probably had to travel with it,
Yeah.
which is
Well, right.
which is difficult.
Acquiring it the day of is useful, and being forced to acquire it earlier seems like a great tircha. Yeah.
Right.
Good. Okay. Rashi has one more comment on the verse. Anyone? Am I missing anyone? Okay. Joel, this is on Sela Veit Avot, and we
Sela Veit
discussed
Avot.
this on the pshat level already. What might the distinction be between Beit Avot, which again is not an old age home in biblical Hebrew, and Bayit? Go ahead.
Mishpacha achat, for one family. Harei shehayu merubin, because they were many. Yachol se'echad. Oh, if it was many,
Good.
then it would be possible to have one. Lekulan.
Put a question mark after Lekulan if you want to help yourself understand the.
Yachol se'echad lekulan. Would one be enough for everybody?
Good. Yachol in rabbinic Hebrew is asking a question whose answer is almost always no. Could it be that Yachol? No, not the case. So it's asking a question that's going to be knocked down. Okay.
Talmud Lomar, that is to teach us, Selabite, one lamb for a house.
Okay. What do you think he's saying? First, he translates Beit Avot as mishpacha, and by mishpacha, he doesn't mean nuclear family, he means clan, right? So the basic rule is that you take one seh for the wide mishpacha, and you did it very well. Harei shaya. What if? Harei shahayu. What if it was a very big family, Merubin? Yachol, is it possible? Se echad lechulan, that the Torah is really saying that only one lamb goes to all of them. Why might you be confused by that? Why might that not be a good thing? Not enough. You're supposed to eat this, right? This is both symbolic and it's being consumed. Might I think the Torah is saying that what if you have 30 people in this clan or 60 people in this clan and not only 10? Are you only supposed to take one lamb for the entire household? Talmud Lomar, the Torah comes to teach us.
No, you need one for each physical house.
Right, or you can have one for each family house, right? So the initial supposition is a clan in ancient Egypt has about the right number of people for everyone to be sated by a single lamb. I don't know. I don't know how many. I don't know how much lamb you need. I don't know how many ounces of lamb you need and I don't know how many people they're assuming are in a family. But if your family happens to be sufficiently big, right? If the family happens to be sufficiently big, such that by only having one lamb for everybody, you're not either going to be sated in your belly or having fulfilled the obligation to eat it, which comes later. Then just pick one set for a family, for a household, for a house, and the reason why this is significant is because the next verse, just giving you a little bit of preview, is going to go in the opposite direction, right? So this is if there are too many people for one lamb, and the next verse is going to be what if there are too few people for one lamb, okay?
I think that except for a very small lamb, when one slaughters a lamb, there's going to be enough meat that quite a large group of people could each have a kazayas. That wouldn't be the whole sumptuous meal, so as to sate them, but it would fulfill the mitzvah of having a bite of lamb.
Yeah, but we are conflating halachic obligations for how much meat you eat to be yotzei for your obligation as Seder with what may have been intended this night, which is dinner, right? So there's nothing about a kazayat in the 12th chapter of Shemot. I mean, there's and obviously Midrash expands on a lot of things. It's not clear here if the concern is minimal, anachronistic halachic obligation or enough to feed you that meal, right? Probably the intent in the pshat is the latter, not the former.
This editor seems to look forwards and backwards and say that each person had to have a bite.
Well, certainly when this text is rendered into practice by the Talmud, it's going to eventually be transmuted into a notion of a minimum having to do with an olive's worth. But in the story itself, maybe not. Rebecca?
Years ago, we went to a Samaritan Pesach in Israel.
Wow.
And so as part of that, each household slaughters an animal. And so besides anticipating that they're roasting it and they're going to eat it afterwards, each head of the household took some blood and put it on the forehead of each of the family members. So maybe there's something other than anticipating enough for people to eat that is kind of more intimate and something that they did where the head of the household, has done the sacrifice and has that for every family member and does other things other than the eating of it.
Wow. How did that come to be? That doesn't happen accidentally that you end up doing Pesach with a Samaritan.
It was a Haganat HaTeva trip, like their version of the Sierra Club. I'll let Leonard talk about it. The Samaritan. When we went to the Samaritan Pesach, Leonard actually went.
Like in Har Grizim? You were up?
Yeah.
No kidding. Yeah. And did you watch the sacrifice?
Yes. I think this was in 1994. 95.
Wow.
So I also was there in 76, and things changed quite a bit in between. I was in Haifa. It was a break from school. I was at the Hebrew University, and I went to the tourist office to ask, how do I get to Har Grizim, which is Nablus, basically. And, I was perfectly willing to take buses through the West Bank to get there. And the guy didn't want me to do that. He kept on saying, it's not recommended, whatever. And I was undeterred. I was just going to do it, but I didn't know how. Finally, he gives up on me and he calls one of his friends and he says, I've got some idiot over here who wants to go to Har Grizim. Can you give him a ride?
Wow.
And so I got a ride and he drove through the West Bank. And anyway, but it turns out that they actually knew one of the families there. So before the ceremony started, we actually went into one of the houses and they showed us, they didn't actually make the matzah, but they showed us how they made the matzah. There was this dome-shaped thing with the blowtorch underneath it. And anyway.
And it was probably soft.
I don't know. They didn't make it in front of me. But, and then when and then it was sort of like bleachers on both sides with like a fenced off area in the middle where everything was taking place. And they invited me inside with them so I could actually see what was going on. And I was taking pictures and whatever. And I had some friends from the Hebrew University who were up in the bleachers who were going, isn't that Leonard down there?
Like Forrest Gump.
Did he turn into a Samaritan? What's going on?
Wow.
So, and then I went back with my friends but yeah, it was very interesting. They, you see them actually slaughtering the animals. There's one of the organs, I couldn't tell you which one it is, spleen or something, who knows, where the kids actually blow into it and it blows up like a balloon, just for fun. Anyway, then they
Does
roast.
sound fun.
Then they roast. I'm sorry.
That does sound fun.
Yeah. And everybody's got these, red blood stains on their forehead. And then they roast the meat, but like the Bible says, you don't eat it until midnight.
Right.
So we were long gone before the feast actually happened.
Do you remember if they were speaking to one another in Hebrew?
Yes, they do speak Hebrew. Well, there's two communities of Samaritans. There's one in Nablus, which is now moved. Now it's almost like an Israeli settlement because they were being harassed by the locals there. But anyway, there's one in Nablus and one in Cholon near Tel Aviv.
Huh.
And all I heard people speak was Hebrew.
Fascinating.
And the other thing is that there's only, I'm not sure they all exist still, but anyway, when I was there was only 7 families. There's only 7 family names. Everybody's related to everybody. And in fact, when I was leaving, I went up to the family that had invited us into their home to thank them for their hospitality. And the guy said, well, thank you very much, but you're probably referring to one of my cousins. It wasn't me. They were like carbon copies of each other.
Wow.
It's unbelievable.
Wow.
Before the sacrifice takes place, it was also a quite moving as the high priest, cloaked in white, surrounded by others also dressed in white, was there was kind of like a procession and a chanting and gets up to a fever pitch, and then everybody did the sacrifice at the signal. And we were staying with or maybe we visited the next day my Orthodox cousins, and one of them said, I would like to one day maybe take my son to see that, because that's the closest you're going to get to being able to see what it was like, in ancient Israel in that time. That would be very, very interesting to show to my son. So she thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, it is kind of peering back into time a little bit, right? Because they're intentional freezing of the ideas.
And we did take a copy of their Haggadah they were using, and it's written in ancient Hebrew script, right? Wow. We'll bring it sometime.
I'd love to see that.
Yeah, the thing about the Haggadah is that it's not really a Haggadah. It's just what do you call it? A collection of excerpts from the Torah.
Right.
But
because
it's
they have no rabbinic. They don't have the Haggadah. They don't have the Mishnah.
Right. So they're just basically reading selections from the Torah, but it's all in the ancient script. So the guy was actually, reading it to me, and at one point I could follow along, but I can't do that anymore.
Fascinating. Thank you both for those reminiscences. Okay. Anything left on this verse itself? Celebrate a vote. All right, Stevie.
All right. Well, first of all, I'll say that that was fascinating, but it's possible to watch on YouTube some small section of what you described. So if anyone is curious, you can Google that. But just that Rashi's assertion that Beit Avot is the big thing and Bait is the small thing makes the second verse a little bit awkward, because it says if Bait is too small, right? Whereas if Bait was too small, you just do Beit Avot, right?
The verse we're about to read.
Right, exactly. In the next verse. So Rashi's sort of explanation it's a little difficult. It's not a.
Yeah. So we'll raise that again when we get to it. Barry?
Yeah, just before we get into it, I think the one phrase to me that links the two, what we did and what we're going to, is that nothing can be left over for the morning. So whether it's a large family or a small, nothing can be left over.
Right, which we don't know yet. We're gonna learn that material soon. So let's jump into verse 4. Stevie, do you want to read that verse since you were anticipating it?
V'imimata bait mios misa v'lakachu ushcheno hakrov el beso v'michsas nafshos ish lefiochlo tachosu alasa. All right. So if small is the household from a lamb, then it should take and those who dwell close to the house in accounting, I guess, of the people, a person for his eating tachosu. I don't know.
The michsat and tachosu are hard. It's the same root, but we'll look at BDB in a second to get a sense of.
So it's also like a counting word.
Correct. If you look at how Onkelos translates michsat and tachosu, you'll see he doesn't translate it as if it's from the verb lechaso, which means to cover. You could sort of make sense of this in the notion of cover if you play with how the word cover is used in English, but I'm not sure it's used in Hebrew that way. Like in cover, say, will you cover this charge? It's the same English word and it means to pay for. I'm not sure the verb lechasot, which literally just means on top of, is used that way in Hebrew, but it's tempting. But if you, right?
Yeah.
You can?
Yeah. Also, michsa is like something that counting or is enough.
Uh-huh. The question is actually the same root. Look at Onkelos. Onkelos translates michsat nefashot as biminyan nafshata. So a michsa, he's rendering as a minyan, an accounting, an enumeration. And the end of the phrase, tachosu al haseh, he turns into his titmanun al imra. Again, accounting, like minyan. So he's saying that the best way to render this is having to do with a cheshbon, an enumeration. But before we go that down and dirty, give us a sense of what you think the whole verse means. And I'm not sure I agree with you, by the way, that this phrase means that Rashi might be inverting Beit and Bayit, because if Beit Avot is too big, then if it's too big, then you can have one per Bayit, right? But what if the Bayit is too small?
Then you'd have one per Beit Avot.
No, the reverse.
If Beit Avot is either Beit Avot is too big or Beit Avot is too small, I think makes more sense than to say if Beit Avot is too big, but if Bayit is.
No, to me it makes perfect sense. So if okay, you have a goat, it can feed 30. Let's say a standard Beit Avot is 30. Well, if your Beit Avot is 50, then you can just take a goat per house. Well, a house is 10. I'm just making this out. But if your house is too small to consume a goat, then you can go with your neighbor.
So you're imagining that there's both that it's simultaneously the Beit Avot is 50, not 30, and that the Bayit is 5, not 15.
Simultaneously mean the same situation?
Yeah, for the same person, one is too big and the other is too small.
Yes, but Lav Daf doesn't, but not
yeah,
necessarily.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Fine. All right.
But okay, but render the verse again, like
so
the whole idea.
If the Bayit is too small for its own lamb, then it should, along with those who dwell in a nearby house, and eat according to the populations of those houses, should contribute towards, the acquiring and eating of the lamb.
Good. And we'll discuss whether it's contributing towards or literally allowing yourself to be counted towards. And as Barry said, the only reason why this verse makes sense, because you could say to yourself, if you didn't know the verse 10 was coming, we'll look at a second, you could say, why? What's the problem of having leftover? So if my house is too small to finish a goat, we'll put it, we'll throw it out, or we'll give it to the dogs, or we'll preserve it. But look at verse 10, which we're going to read slowly when we get to it. Lo totiru menu ad boker. Don't leave any over until the morning. v'hanotar mimenu, and anything that is left over ad boker in the morning, ba'esh tisrofu, you have to burn. And later on in the halachic material in the Talmud, it's not just that you shouldn't leave it over, but if you do, you burn it. It's that it's almost sinful to have any left over that night, right? So since that's the case, that there's supposed to be an almost exact amount of meat per person, which again makes me think that in context norm, we're not talking about a kazayat, but we're talking about consumption, then it's very significant that you neither have too many people for one seh nor too few, which is the relationship between those two verses. Barry and then Leonard.
So I've been going through this thing about the counting, who's counting, not counting. And I think my sense of it is that you bring the neighbors in to consume it, but they're not counted as members of the household. Their function is basically to help consume it.
Well, I think it's one and the same. I think that you are doing an accounting for how many people should be assigned to this seh, so that every goat that is being plucked is accounted for, and every person who's responsible for this mitzvah is accounted for.
But they're not counted as the household, as the bayit.
They're counted as the chabura, as the group of people who are eating this particular seh. Yeah. Leonard, and then we'll start looking at the Rashi.
So the root of lechasot is kaf samech hey.
Maybe.
Not maybe. According to the dictionary, that's the root of lechasot, to cover.
Yeah.
Okay, but
maybe. Go ahead. BDB disagrees, but go ahead.
You can write your own dictionary. Okay. But the word that we have here, at least the first word that we have here, michsat, the word michsa, actually comes from the word meches, which means a tax or a toll, right? So something that you're counting up and allocating, applying, levying on whatever. But what's interesting is that this verse appears to be using both of those roots.
Right, which is why I said maybe. Right, so the noun michsa in the phrase michsat nefashot, which is part of the smichud, seems like it should be from the same root from which we have the verb tachosu, so it's parallel. If you look up kaf samech hey lechasot in BDB, he makes no reference whatsoever to there being a usage of that root having anything to do that would with this concept. If you look up michseh in BDB, I want to pull this up for you. Okay, so trust me that if you look up kaf samech, none of what he says about that has anything to do with our verse. But in michseh, which he interestingly connects to machar, he thinks it's that the root was mem kaf resh, and somehow the resh turned into a samech. We've talked about this before, that sometimes the first two letters of a root create a family of ideas, so that the mem chaf like split out into mem kaf resh, machar, and also mem kaf samech, which I think you're right, is why we get the notion of a tax, a levy, or having to do with commerce. But he thinks that michseh, and he doesn't specifically quote the end of a verse, tachosu, is the root of both words in this verse, having to do with possession or property, and related to this Assyrian word makuru, right? So we don't really know. Actually, I wonder if this little piece at the bottom here, where he just gives the root kaf samech hey, is his way of saying that there's also a verb form, and that might be what our tachosu al haseh is. But when you look up, I'll just show you. You look up kaf samech hey, he gives no indication, unless we're talking about how the word cover itself can mean cover a price, that root has anything to do with what we're talking about. So kaf samech hey, so to cover, to hide, a garment, conceal, and then if you go to the next entry, all of these references, if you spent the time on it, gets us nowhere near tachosu al haseh. Cover, conceal, cover, spread over, cover, overwhelm. Nothing having to do with count or be assigned to or commerce. Leonard.
Well, I think there's two words that we're confusing over here.
Okay.
Because the word is not michseh, it's michsa. And according to the dictionary, michsa is a number or amount, whereas michseh is the covering, right? There's two different words coming from two different roots.
Maybe. Yeah, I don't know. I think probably philologists disagree, because it would make sense to me that BDB would have given that as an option on that page also, and he doesn't. So BDB and your guy just might not agree, and sometimes that happens. I gave a little mini drash yesterday. We had an event on the roof where we dedicated the two new buildings, the two new rooms, the STEAM lab and the art lab on the roof of the Gansberg building, and we put up a mezuzah. And I talked about the fact that no one really knows why the word mezuzah means the word mezuzah. And the two basic schools are thought is that mezuzah is built from the root lazuz, to move, because the mezuzah was actually the part of the door that was hinged, and so it's constantly moving. But some people think that it's from an Arab Akkadian word, azaza or something, which means stable, which means unmoving, because that's what a door is, a stable part of a building. And I talked about the fact that even our interaction with a mezuzah is representing both ideas. On the one hand, we put a mezuzah up, we have the bracha likboa mezuzah, to affix it here permanently. Like, this is an established residence. But our interaction with the mezuzah is only when we're going in and out of a place, only through movement. So sometimes we just don't know, right? We really have no agreement as to whether the origin of the word mezuzah is motion or the absence of motion. Rick, see your hand. I'm sorry if it was up before. I didn't see it.
No, it's okay. Now I have two things, but the first thing was mas. I know you like two-letter roots, so I know that mas also means tax. So I was going to have you look to see if that was related to the michsa and all that. But now that you brought up mezuzah, and I see that Tova's there, the Egyptian temples, they had these inscriptions on the doorpost that stayed there. It wasn't on a hinge, and it would be all these blessings and prayers and things that you would see on the way in and out. So I just wanted to throw that in.
Mm-hmm. Good. Anything to add to that, Tova? Now that you've been put on the spot? No, she's demurring.
Okay. Did you want to look up Moss and see what it might lead to with the tax? Or I know you like the two.
Perhaps off time. I don't want to go start looking for it right now. What's that?
It's a body of forced laborers.
What is? A body of forced laborers.
Only later, modern people.
Okay. Anything else on the verse itself? Yes, Rebecca.
I just wanted to add, with michsa and michse, there's also the word neches, which is something you own, right? A property, which might be coming. I don't know how to connect that to the root, but it could also be something that you count as your property, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's kaf samech he or mem kam.
Yeah, I don't know either, and I don't even know if it's knowable, right? Tova, was your hand up?
I just had the question about the use of ish throughout. Do we read this? Is it clear that it's referring to all members of the household and not just to the males?
In terms of who's obligated actually to participate in it? Yeah, you're right. It's possible to read the verse as saying that who should be accounting each man according to how much he would eat.
Yeah.
Although our understanding of who is to participate in this was ultimately everyone.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's a good thing to raise as to, is this a situation where ish really means person? Right. Although interesting, Uncle is very clear to translate ish as gvar, which is an intentional choice on his part to make it a male, right? Because gvar really only means a male, whereas ish supposedly could also mean a person. Yes, Norm?
Could it also be that the men were going to go there and give their accounting, and this one was going to say, I'm going to need enough for at least 6 bites, and the other one who only has one shell says, I'm going to need one for at least 3 bites, and so on, as they figure out how much they're going to need of the lambs, so that a man with a large family needs more than a man with a small family. Not only the men are going to be eating, even though only the men are participating in this accounting process. That seems to me to be a possibility.
Could be,
but it's ambiguous.
Rebecca's comment before gave me an idea, and I'm so grateful for it, because I actually now solved, at least for myself, what BDB thinks is going on in this verse, because I was confused why he doesn't make any reference to this verse, because usually in BDB, he specifically brings you to a verse that is a problem verse where words are unclear. He does, but not on that root. He thinks this is from the root kaf samech samech. Look up there on the screen. Kaf samech samech means to compute, to divide up, to make small, to chew, to break up. And he tells us, he gives us our word from the verse, michsa, which means a computation, which he does think is related to meches, but not because the root is mem kaf samech, but because the root is kaf samech samech, a valuation or a number or worth. So according to BDB, the root of both of these words, the michsa noun and the tachosu verb, is kaf samech samech, and sometimes the second letter of a root drops out in a verb form. So thank you for that, Rebecca. Okay, Rebecca, other Rebecca, and then we'll look at the Rashi.
Yeah, I was just going to say on Sefaria, when you click on the Hebrew word, on the b'michsat takes you to the michsa reference for BDB, and when you click on the tachosu, that one takes you to the chasas reference for BDB. So it has 2 references
to 2 different words. Interesting.
Yeah.
So there's no consensus. Rick, is your hand up again or still?
Just one more time, please. So I just wanted to comment on nefashot. It just kicked in my head that when Abraham left, he all these nefesh, the other
Kol hanefesh asher becharan. Yeah.
Yes. So in both places, it could have just said people, anashim, or it could have said other descriptions. But to say nefashot, I think it's just a nice way to call the group. Everybody's got the same feeling, got the same intentions.
Yeah, it's a very 1970s read back on biblical Hebrew. You're right that we use nefesh to mean spirit. The Bible uses nefesh to mean almost the exact opposite: person, actual body, right? Like almost like flesh. But yes, when the rabbis read kol hanefesh asher asu b'charan, they're beginning to read into that word kind of a spiritual overtone. But it's pretty clear that the pshat of the word nefesh in Hebrew, in the biblical Hebrew, does not mean the inanimate spiritual part of us, but our actual corpuses. Yeah. Yes. Leonard.
I'm glad you brought up the kaf samach samach.
Okay.
It means, it actually has more than one, but that's beside the point. It means to compute, to reckon, to calculate, right? And so it's a hapax legomenon in the Bible appearing only in this verse in the form of tachosu.
But not including michsa here, or the double use in this verse is a hapax legomenon?
No, the only place where...
As a verb.
No, the only place where this thing is used as a verb, meaning to compute and to reckon, is right here in our verse.
Uh-huh.
So the verses look similar, but they are I mean, the two words look similar, but they have totally different roots.
Michsa and tachosu.
Right.
According to that, according to BDB, they're the same, right? And according to BDB, the michsa is the noun or the gerund from the verb kaf samach samach, and it's a very interesting hapex legomenon, because it would mean that the only use of this root in the Bible doesn't actually have the letters that comprise the root, which is the two samachs, the kaf samach samach.
Well, there is another kaf samach samach, which means to chew or to grind, and that one's not listed as a hapex legomenon. It's probably related to this guy over here, but in the other place, apparently there's other places in the Bible where you'll find it, but it means to chew, not to calculate.
Okay. Right. And as we'll see, because Rashi is going to point us there, the noun form, michsa, whether or not it's from the same root, does appear related to accounting in a Parshat Bechukotai, and will be pointed there in a second. Bahar?
Yeah, it's the war with Midian.
The michsat erkecha?
Sorry. I meant in at the end of Bamidbar.
It may appear that it may appear there also. It also appears in Bechukotai regarding accounting. Okay. What time is it? Let's see if we can begin the Rashi on this verse. Who read the verse? Stevie did. So you want to take the Rashi? So this is on the phrase "V'imimat habayit miyot miseh."
V'imimat habayit miyot miseh. So if there's too few in the house for a lamb. V'imiyu mu'atin miyot miseh. So if there's too few in the house for a lamb. Achar she'en yochlin.
I think it's an echad. Miseh echad.
Oh, and for one lamb. She'en yochlin lochlo, so they're not able to eat it. Ve'yavo li'adei notar, and there could be leftovers.
Right, and that's where it's the push ahead to verse 10, and we know that there's not supposed to be leftovers.
V'lakachu shcheno v'gomer, so then it quotes the rest of the verse is what you're supposed to do. Zehu mishma'o lefi pshuto. So this is how we understand the pshat.
Right. So the first thing Rashi says is what you think the verse means is probably what the verse means. But
V'od yesh bo midrash, but there's also this midrash. L'lamed she'amar she'achar she'nim nimcho alav
nimnu. It's nimnu.
Nimnu alav yochlin le hit me'at le meshuch yidehem himenu,
which is mimenu,
the le himenu al se'acher. Okay, so the midrash, which teaches that when that after gathering around it, it's possible to reduce yourself and move to be in another group, I guess.
Right. So the situation is, let's say we're in a situation where one house was too small for one seh, so the Goldbergs decided to go with the Shapiros. And originally the Shapiro says, yeah, we'll do Pesach with you tonight. I mean, tonight, it's the night. And the question is, what if afterwards the Shapiro say, you know what? I know we've been officially written down as sharing your seh. We actually, there's a shorter walk if we go to the Coopers, right? Can they move from the seh to which they've been assigned to a different seh? And keep going.
All right. Bo le mishuch yedehem. Sorry. The hitmaat miyot misa yit metu beod haseh kayam beyoto b'chaim.
Okay.
Below mish nishat. All right. So you can do this only, you can only, retrieve your hands, I guess, and diminish. And then you learn from the words miyot miseh.
Good.
That you can do this as long as the seh is alive, but is enduring and in life, but not after it's been sacrificed.
Right, because the idea is that a seh is called a seh as long as it's alive. Once it's not alive, it's butchered meat, right? So this is a midrash reading into the words mihiyot miseh in the middle of the verse, which is an interesting phrase. Im yimat habayit. And it's also reading yimat habayit differently in the pshat. The pshat is if there are too few people in this house to consume an entire seh. The midrash reads im yimat habayit. If the household that has been established as a household to consume the seh wants to self-reduce, yimat, and to basically go be assigned to a different one, mihiyot miseh, as long as the seh is still in the status of a seh, then and only then, then you can go to the next one. The idea is being that there can be exchanges of people who are going to be accounted to, and assigned to the same seh as long as the animal is alive. Once the animal has been sacrificed, if you were on that list, that's where you have to have your Korban Pesach. And I think that this midrash is operating the midrash that Rashi is quoting is not operating ex post facto regarding the obligations in the narrative of Exodus night, but ex post facto to when the temple stood, and this was happening every Seder night, if that makes sense. It's not trying to comment on the narrative, it's commenting on the law that governed eating your Korban Pesach with your Chavurah as long as the temple stood. Barry and then Joel.
So I'm trying to visualize this. So you have a series of small households, and there's a roving group of eaters. And so they're assigned to the first household, and they're going to help consume that. And they can be counted into the second household so long as they haven't slaughtered the lamb yet.
No. You're only accounted for one. And the question is, do you want to change your reservation? And you can only change your reservation up until the moment that the animal is slaughtered. But it's not, I don't think it's a roving group of eaters. I think it's everyone, pick a team, right? Pick a group, right? And they're choosing teams, and you can change your team as long as the animal is still alive. But I think every person is only eating at one Korban Pesach. Whose hand was up? Joel, and then I see Joanna.
My footnote says that the midrash comes from reading mihiyot from michiyot.
Oh, chiyot in the lifetime of the interesting. It's interesting because it doesn't need that, because mihiyot miseh works as a verb to be as long as it is a seh. So I wonder why the footnote is pushing that, and maybe it appears that way in the midrash itself. I don't know. Joanna.
I remember learning, like, our practice Seder night today is that you're not supposed to go from house to house Seder night. Is that based on this?
It depends on what we're referring to. There's a wonderful nerdy set of scholarship on what the afikomen is, and some people, whatever the afikomen is, it's not what we pretend it to be, right? The scholars believe that afikomen is from the Greek word epikumen, which meant a post-meal revelry spilling out into the streets, right? Which usually led to stuff that from Jews are not supposed to do, certainly not in public, right? And the idea is that ein maftirin afikoman probably meant in the Mishnah that you should not. What does maftir literally mean? Do the next thing after you finish. That's what maftir means in Shabbat morning. After you finish your meal, don't spill out into the streets and have a bacchanalian feast, which is going to make this. Yes, we know it's a Greek symposium and that we've turned into a Jewish night, but we don't want to make it more Greeky by going out in the streets and dancing naked, right? That's probably what it meant then. I don't know if that's what we're referring to. I don't know of a halacha or even a minhag that says you're not supposed to go from one Seder to another, but I am aware that some people understand that line about the afikomen, suggesting that when the meal is over, the meal is over. The way we observe it technically is you take a last bite of the matzah and you eat nothing around your table. What it really meant is don't go to the after party, the après. Are you aware, Joanna, of it being an actual kind of semi-halachic custom that you should only go to one Seder a night?
Yes, yes, but I don't know the source of it. So I was just trying to make that connection next.
First, I'm hearing of it, but there are a lot of things I haven't heard of.
I'll just add that in the Tosefta's version of the Seder, it specifically encourages Sedarim to combine for Hallel.
Huh. Wow.
So,
Leonard and then Carl.
I would just like to say that it looks like Eliyahu's got a big problem. As he goes not just to one Seder, he goes to quite a few.
I know. He's an apikoros, that guy. Carl? Epicurus. That's what it is the same word, yeah. But not epikumun is not the same word as epikoros, but probably the epi is shared in the Greek. But yeah, but epikumun I think is different. Yeah.
So I can think of all kinds of further applications of this principle that once you've signed up for one thing, you can only change up to a certain point. You sign up for the vegetarian entree for Shabbos dinner, and you show up and that chicken looks great. I'm going to have that instead. No. You got to tell them in advance. Or you go to a limud and there's 6 classes every time on the schedule. If you signed up for one and they picked a room for that, you can't change your mind after a certain point. Does anybody make a more general principle of this?
I mean, you're asking the great question is what's the sermonica? What's the sermon material lingering in every one of these comments, right? What's the Dvar Torah? You could certainly make that Dvar Torah. We learned the night that we became a people that at some point you have to stick to your commitments. Is that what was intended by the verses? No, but it doesn't matter. That's a wonderful Dvar Torah. I can imagine giving that Dvar Torah to my children. See, the most significant thing we learned from Pesach is once you put your name on a list, you stay on the list until the goat is dead. Okay, so we went from halfway through a Rashi to halfway through a Rashi. That's like the Danny Kaye line. This is the movie that ends in the middle for the sake of the people who came in the middle, right? So we're going from halfway through to a halfway. We'll pick up on Michsat, which is where we're going to see at least Rashi pointing us to a pasuk from Bechukotai. Have a good week, everyone. Kol Tuv. See ya.
You've been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am, Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.